So obviously, there's things that in here are important to all of us as you're representing. I'm going to be in your way here, aren't I? You're representing parents most of the time, correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So I think, you know, in talking about this, one of the things that what's the goal? Why do I do what I do still? Why are you in this field? And what should our goal be? So anecdotally, when I started this program in East LA a long time ago, I really thought that my job was going to be that I was going to be sitting there, sending people to jail or taking kids away from parents, and that was that was actually why the county hired me, because I actually was started the whole field of child sex abuse, and was open and was wanting to come in at night and all that. So I thought I was actually going to be spending a lot more time. But that was my role, that I was going to be doing that. When I found out to be the case, which was fascinating, because here I was, a Northern European in East LA, much to the dismay of people like Gloria Molina initially, that I was the wrong ethnicity to be in her hospital, was that wasn't my role. That a great number of the kids that were sent in to me with their parents, without their parents, were brought in by DCFS, were brought in error. And they should never have been in the system in the first place. And the idea that we were going to intervene to take kids away from parents based on a really, really bad medical or bad sense of what was wrong with this kid. That, for example, I can, very early on in my career, one of the judges finally figured out, and they'd say, well, have Astrid take a look at this kid. And there was this poor little kid who's 8 years old, who was on her way home from school or on her way to school, and she started bleeding vaginally. She's 8 years old. And minority kid. And so when she got to school, the nurse took her to reported to DCFS that she'd been sexually abused because she was bleeding vaginally, right? What other cause could there possibly be for vaginal bleeding in an 8-year-old? Right, and unfortunately, for her, it happened to be her birthday. It took 6 months to get children's court to send her home, and she had premature menses. So she had gone through her sexual maturation at age 8, and she was out of her home for 6 months until a judge ordered her to come see me, and I said she's completely normal because nobody did a complete exam on her. Right, another kid in Monterey Park at one of the hospitals here at age 3 started having vaginal bleeding, also reported to DCFS. But at this point, we had instituted this sort of not chiseled in stone, but rule that said, don't take kids away from parents unless we see them. If it's based on a medical exam, we don't want you to do that because you're going to make a mistake. And this little girl had estrogen producing tumor at age 3. And when they examined her at the hospital here in Monterey Park, they didn't bother to note that she already had breast development, which would have been an absolute slam dunk, that she had estrogen on board that she shouldn't have at age 3. And you would work her up for a malignancy to see if you had something producing estrogen. So it could go on and on that way of mistakes that were made. The other night I got called back into the clinic. I was on the 5 freeway going north. I got called back in because a African-American couple had gone into an ER in a fairly affluent community in the suburbs of Los Angeles with I want to say 18-month-old little girl who had vaginal bleeding. And again, we now have a rule, the DCFS, you can't take that kid literally away unless they're seen by somebody who knows what they're doing, without some history associated. So medical finding, and this should be a gold standard for everybody in this room. You get a report that says this kid was detained based on a medical finding, they have to be seen by one of the doctors that are in the hubs around the county. We'll talk about the hubs. But you can't accept that. because so many times they make a mistake. So this little kid, I'm called back in, and DCFS had held off calling the cops, which was good, because they would have cross-reported to the police. But the rule was you have to take them to LAC USC off hours because we're the only one that's open at night. And I looked at this little kid, and I walked in the door, and I knew what I was going to see. She had what's called urethral prolapse, which is very common in the African American population. And it's a congenital finding, it's no big deal. So by coming back, talking to DCFS, talking to the family, and there's treatment for that, sending the family out, the kid was not detained. And that's what we want to do. We want to do appropriate, accurate, scientific exams. And one of the things that, when I started my career in this field, there was no photo documentation of findings. And because there wasn't any prosecution of sexual assault of small children, or actually even adolescents or adults much going on, I went and spent some time with the two people in the United States who said they were actually doing sexual abuse exams on kids. And I walked in the door with them and went to clinic with them, stood there, watched what they were doing, and went, no way. I don't believe what you're doing is accurate, because you have no way of really documenting and reviewing. There's no peer review. There's no consensus. So I don't agree with that. So I went back, I talked to the manufacturer that made the colposcopes at that time, and actually in medicine, you have teaching scopes, and teaching scopes have another portal on them. So you have what you're looking at, and then there's an ancillary portal on it, so that you can teach on these with scientific equipment. So I had to put a camera on there. So that started a consensus, and it was established as a standard of care for child sex abuse in California, and then that was used to standardize it for the world in a case called California versus Menendez years ago. And what it did is essentially held everybody to a standard, which is great, because if they have a case, they should be photographing. They're doing them. And there is an opportunity to review the case and give a real answer. And I do a lot of cases in Europe over the internet. Well, they send me the cases not over the internet, and then I testify over the internet, because they're wrong most of the time, a lot of them in the family court cases. And they make a lot of mistakes. The other thing that, and don't quote me on this, which you will, of course, and I'll get in trouble, and that's not. I think that programs that are financially linked to law enforcement and are dependent on being paid by law enforcement for their opinions in child sex abuse cases, which is where they are driven by a need to make the law enforcement happy. And you should not be happy with that exam. The hub system in the county is not connected to the cops. We don't get paid by the police. We see all the cases. There's no driven force behind the scenes saying, I really want to get this guy, I need medical findings. So we're going to very briefly talk about sex abuse, because I want to talk about some other things about physical abuse as well. But I know it's at the very end, and I'll run out of gas by then, and I want to, because that's where a huge percentage of the mistakes are made in child sex abuse cases. I can tell you that most of your sex abuse cases are going to be normal exams. If they're not normal exams, you should have them reviewed by somebody, period, because they're usually making up stuff. For example, the story's better than the actual stuff. I work for the Innocence Project in the United States. I do a lot of work for the Innocence Project, and I also do work for the Habeas Corpus Project, which has had people on death row. And I do it because I got involved in some cases out of Texas. And if you didn't speak English, if you're a minority, or if you were gay and you lived in Texas, you had a very, very good chance of being incarcerated, period. So I have the 2 cases. I got involved in a couple of cases there. One was a civil suit, which ended up was what precipitated me into the Innocence Project, in which there was a big lawsuit in a preschool case down there, in which the deep pockets were the people that owned the preschool, and the parents wanted this little girl to be abused. So I got involved in that, which was a fascinating case to watch, because they filmed all the interviews with her, and they filmed the interview with the consulting psychiatrist in San Francisco, who was going to make a bloody fortune off of suing this. But the idea being is that they made up the medical exam, and the exam was normal, and the individuals who were connected to law enforcement said they were abnormal exams. So that started my relationship with these lawyers down in Texas, and a lot of them were doing pro bono work for the Innocence Project. So they sent me this case. This was classic, just classic. They asked me to look at this case of a little girl who was not yet 5. She would never qualify to testify in court. And they sent me the case, and I looked at it, and they had pictures. Again, great. Good for you, Astrid. You made everybody take pictures, taking pictures. I looked at the pictures, completely normal, absolutely perfectly normal. I teach normal occupancy. And this little kid had said nothing until she had been browbeaten for about an hour and a half by somebody, because she came home from, she'd come home from preschool with blood in her underwear. Now, we've already talked about there's a lot of causes of blood in the underwear that are not related to sexual trauma or anything like that. Most of them are not. So she came home, and they took her to advocacy center that was to law enforcement, and they interviewed this little kid who was like 3 and a half for an hour and a half, and then they made a medical exam, and they accused the only guy that worked in the preschool. And I get this case, it looks normal. So what are you talking about? So the DA gets on the phone with me, and this is what he says. He says, I'm going to prosecute. I don't care what you say, Mr. Heger, I'm going to prosecute anyway. And I said, this kid, the kid they were accusing was 19. And he said, I'm going to wait until this little girl is old enough to testify. I'm going to put her on the stand, and then we're going to put this guy away. I said, well, it's a normal exam. And the prosecutor says, well, my nurse examiner, and that should give you a hint as to what I'd be careful about. My nurse examiner that works in the advocacy center says it's abnormal. And she's gone to court for me several hundred times in cases in West Texas. And she always draws the trauma in on the pictures for the jury in a red marker. And I said, what? He said, yeah. And I said, well, there's no trauma there. He says, yeah, no, but she draws it in on the picture that we project for the jury. And we get convictions. And I said, so let me clear this up. If I kill my ex-husband on Christmas Eve, right, and you come to me and you say, I understand that you had a big row with your ex-husband, and you killed him on Christmas Eve, and I say, wait. I was at my parents', and I have pictures to prove that I was there. And you look at the pictures, and I'm not there. So my drawing myself in there is a good alibi. And he goes, oh, you're so funny. You think you're so funny. And he says, I don't care what you say, I'm going to prosecute. And he pushed this kid, normal, 3.5-year-old. I had to buy a ticket to go to West Texas. I'm on my way down the 105 to the airport, and I get a call from the defense attorney saying that they checked the manifest of the airline, saw that I was on it, and they dropped the charges. Okay. So I'm just telling you, there cannot be a vested interest in there being an abnormal exam. And you have to require that there's that somebody looks at it and makes sure that has an eye for it and is not working for law enforcement. That's it. Because really what we want is appropriate interventions. We don't want somebody taking a kid out of the household based on a really bad exam. We want the kid to find safety, whether it's at home or at the hospital. Right? We're all pro-child. We're all pro-child. So we want them to make sure are in good health, that we assess their mental health. A lot of the kids that get killed by parents in this county got killed by mentally ill parents. And so we want them stable, and we want to have them actually be part of society. That's what I want. And I do not want to send kids back into a bad situation, nor do I want to ever take a child away from a family where they can provide the best possible. Okay, so we were just talking a little bit about that. Pro-family. And I'll say it now, so if I stop speaking, you'll hear me. Right now, that I'm excited about what's going on in LA County, and that what we want to do is look at anticipating families where kids aren't safe and doing prevention strategies and looking at, so for example, we have a hub system. Let's talk about, let me see where I am. I'll talk about the hub system in a second. All right. The hub system was built basically because of errors in diagnosis, and it was built at LACUSC Med Center with private money and then given to the county. It was the idea that every child that's detained or at risk for being detained has the right to have a really good exam, something that would hold up in the court down the street here, and one that will actually look at the kids' health and well-being and hopefully look at their mental health. Now, the LACUSC, where I am, is the only one that has always had mental health, always had mental health. The other thing that happened in the hubs was, so that happened, do any of you remember the Lance Helms case? Yeah. So Lance Helms was killed by his father after the paternal grandmother had made multiple reports and complaints to the legal system in this county. And he had been to every hospital in the county with his father with injuries taken individually, many of whom were still absolutely diagnostic of abuse. But nobody ever really reported him because they were only seeing one injury. But you take the whole collection, it was astounding. And I was at his death review sitting next to Dr. Lakshmanan, and it just pissed me off. And so I got him walked out and I wrote a grant to First Five in which there would always be somebody there that would see kids and make sure they got an appropriate exam. Again, back to not just the kids that are actually being abused, but the kids that are at risk for being reported and taken away in error. So that was the birth of the hubs. And I had two families that were connected to SC, had a lot of money. They went to SC, and SC was courting them to get money. And the women said, we'll give you the money, but you have to give the money to somebody at your university that's doing something for women and children. So that narrowed the field considerably, and I was the only one left. So I got $1 million from this family. And I used most of it to build an electronic system called EM Hub that holds DCFS accountable for referring kids in to be seen. So they couldn't say, which is what they were saying. We called and we talked to Astrid or whatever, and she said the kid didn't need to be seen. It's probably not true. So that has essentially stopped child death in this county if the kids hit the hub. Since we did electronic reporting, kids stopped dying, which was a fascinating outcome. It wasn't really planned. It was kind of wanting to hold DCFS accountable. So in the hub system, the goal in the hub system was that every kid get assessed at the time that you're trying to decide what happens to them. Obviously, if you see a 2-year-old wandering down the railroad tracks at 3 o'clock in the morning, you're going to most likely detain that kid, right? Okay, that's kind of a given. You don't need me to tell you what's wrong with this kid, right? But if for some reason a teacher says, I think this kid's being abused at home because he has a funny looking ear, before that kid goes to foster care, you'd like that funny looking ear to be looked at to find out, oh yeah, it's a congenital malformation of the ear. Look at the dad's ear, he has the same ear, right? But those are cases that we've seen all the time. what is in the best interest of the kid and the family. So our goal right now, and in the house, we see, because we cut a deal and DCF has a protocol, all these kids are supposed to be seen at the time they're detained. And I'll be honest with you, 50% of them are being seen. You have 50% that aren't being seen. So our recommendation is that those kids, we do a pilot and we look at them for how do we support the family in a way that gets the family strong enough that they don't lose their kid. So yes, they would be your clients and they would be in the court system. But what would be mandated would be in-home services, a medical home, a mental health home, mentors, tutors, how's the kid doing at school, people in the community that are worried about food insecurity. So that you're really looking at how do you actually build a strong home for these kids, and that you do have the court support in doing that, and that there is financial support from within the county. And that's why I'm hopeful, because the Board of Supervisors is very interested in doing that now. Our hub's been up and going for 14 years, and it's basically taken 13 of that to capture their interest. So this is where we are in terms of, do you understand what I'm saying to you? If I was sitting in your chair and a case came across my desk, there are a lot of them that I would say, I think this kid got reported by a medical and wasn't seen by an expert. I want the kid reevaluated. I want the case reevaluated. All right? The other thing is that we find out that certain managed care providers in this county actually don't report child abuse, which is a whole other topic. But we'll just talk about the ones that come to your attention and my attention. So we want to be appropriate. Does that make sense? Any questions about that? And that can be physical abuse too, which we're going to talk about a little bit here. All right, so sex abuse rarely kills kids, although it can, but rarely. Physical abuse does. And especially in the little kids. So one of our goals in putting forward a protocol for the county was to say kids under the age of 5 that are reported at all should be seen and evaluated by experts in these centers so that we actually know what's going on, because it's the little kids that die. And so we don't want that. So we should be looking at that. And it's the same in the same way, looking at what is the important piece to know here? For example, we just talked about head injuries for a second. Head injuries, there's a hallmark in these kids that come in, and I think we have to pay attention to it. And I think you have an opportunity to ask these questions. One of the things that's the absolute indicator that this kid's in a lot of trouble at this house is the first time they come in with any injury to their head at all, when they're not ambulating. So one of the phrases that we use in medicine is no cruising. So many of you have kids and you've watched your own kids reach the point where they're cruising on the couch, right? Or table, and they're hanging on. No cruising, no bruising. So if you think about it, unless they're able to get themselves around, which is cruising, about 8 months, they shouldn't be having significant bruising to the head, etc. The other thing that is interesting is there are certain things that are kind of hallmarks, like bruising to the ears. And my godson, I went to their house, and they had their son in daycare downtown. And I walked in because his mother's my best friend. She actually just called me. I walked in to see them for dinner or something at their house in Glendale. And I looked at this kid's ear and I went, "Where's this? What is going on with Luke? Who has access to Luke?" And said, maybe this is true for all your kids. And it looked clearly that somebody had whacked him up the side of the head. Well, the kids' brains are loosey-goosey in there, and the last thing you want is to have your kid losing IQ points because somebody's hitting them upside the head. But that is, a clear indicator that this kid is at risk for serious head injuries, and head injuries are what kills the little kids. Abdominal trauma is what kills the 2-year-olds. Again, how do they work them up? Are they paying attention? Do they have the history? Have they paid attention to the past history? Is there a history of a bleeding disorder? There has to be a sense of actually looking at these kids and figuring out what's wrong with them, rather than just accepting a report from an outside emergency room, which is oftentimes wrong. And I publicly have said in the past, the emergency rooms that I'm most concerned about, and I inevitably get a phone call from that hospital the next day, so I'm not saying that anymore. But I'm telling you, the hubs are in the county. There's MLK, there's Harvard, there's LACUC, there's East San Gabriel Valley at Old McLaren, there's all of you, there's High Desert, and we're looking at putting one in Mid Valley and another one down in Downey, so that there's always accessible. You need to have the judge order that it gets reviewed. We all get paid exactly the same amount of money. We see one kid a month, or if we see 1,000. VIP is seeing about 18,000 kids a year. And I would much prefer seeing the kids than having them go to foster care and error and having to undo it. And there's a couple of ERs in this county that report abuse that is not abuse. And then we have to come into court with you guys and try to undo. And some of you have been in court with me and with my colleagues, all right? So we also want to know if they've been involved with law enforcement, how many reports with DCFS have they had. And that doesn't mean they're going to lose a kid, but that means that they probably need help. You know, it's so interesting to talk to these families and ask them what they need. You know, 4:30 on Friday afternoon in my clinic, and you have a family of 6, 4 kids, these 2 parents, sent there by DCFS. We're worried about, the school's worried about them, that the kids are poorly dressed, they are dirty, and they are skinny. They seem to be hungry all the time. 4:30 in the afternoon on a Friday afternoon. We're required as our mandate in medicine to ask, do you have money or food in the house for the weekend? We have to ask about food insecurity. You know, my point is that nobody does anything about it. We do, because I got really, really, really upset and created a nonprofit so I could get money. And last year I gave close to $300,000 away in food cards. Why? Because at 4:30 on Friday afternoon, they said, I don't have any money. Or why did you hit your kid? I'm frustrated because I can't provide for them. I got mad at them. All right? It's the idea that you have to look at the real needs of that family. I mean, living it where the rubber meets the road where I am, I'm hoping I'm keeping people out of the system and support for them. But Friday afternoon at 4:30, there are no food banks open the next day. There's no place for them to get food stamps, and DCFS is not giving them money for food. Or as one of the advocates in Eastville, I lecture to these young, very, very wonderful, mostly Latina advocates for families in Eastville. I do it 4 times a year. They're great. They're awesome. Someone came up to me and she's talking about food insecurity. And she said to me, she says, you know, Dr. Heger, being poor is lonely. And she says, at my house, growing up, a 1/4 pounder was a hamburger cut in 4 pieces, so each kid had something to eat at night. That's the real world that is happening there. And we can be jaded about it. It's not your problem. I understand that. But it feels like it's my problem, because how does a family provide without getting frustrated and angry and hostile if they don't have food in the house, if they have no shelter? So I think that's an issue that has to be addressed. And that was one of the other reasons that I was eternally grateful that I ended up figuring out how to get a nonprofit. All right, well, that's cool. Somebody help me here. Or it could be a very short life. Just fine for me. So what I'm saying is that, yes, I'm like sometimes I have. Anyway, so, all right, so one of the things is to take home lesson. Child sex abuse has to be seen by an expert or the exam doesn't exist. The exam's normal, and I'll tell you how I know again and again and again that it's normal. And people like to make it abnormal so the law enforcement feels better about it, or you think you have something to take to court. It's not. It's not. And you know what? I do all these federal cases of child pornography cases and international travel to have sex with minors now for the feds. I will have to tell you the first case I did on this international travel. The U.S. attorney brought this case in. I was sitting in my office, and they brought it, and they're so serious. You know, the U.S. attorney is so serious, and right down the line, and they're talking about going to get this guy, and this is the first case they've ever tried with the federal law, and they're getting ready to show me the pornography, and they said, well, we should warn you that that perpetrator appears in this child pornography with these victims, and I said, okay, let's look at this stuff that you got. Oh yes, by the way, he's 87 years old, and I said, I do draw the line there. Whoa. But the idea that you look at it, and there was one case of like 500 images of pre-adolescent kids engaging in child sex abuse, in pornography. And in none of the cases prior to puberty was there penile vaginal or digital vaginal or penetration by an object of the vagina. It was all simulated intercourse, anal intercourse, oral sex, other kinds of things going on. And all of a sudden, just what I was sitting there looking at this going, well, yeah, I know that they're normal exams, but now I've seen physical evidence of what perpetrators collect or what they know. As soon as they hit puberty, then it's full, and then all holds are barred. So again, back to one of the questions about how do you talk about adolescents who are sexually active. You really have to rely on the history from adolescents. And a lot of people don't like adolescents, and they don't believe adolescents. So part of it is a puzzle that you have to sort out, and it's never easy. But you have to understand that most of these cases are actually going to be normal exams. And you have to rely on the history. And when you're in court, are you just in children's court, or are you in family court as well? Just children. Well, in children's court, you're really looking at the well-being of the kid, and I would go forward with a great sense of science and look at what the kid actually said, and who took the history. We try to take the history from kids that are 5 and older, not under 5, and the idea being of asking them what they know about being there. Kids, physical abuse is a lot easier because they're usually referred because they have injuries. So that's very visual and not so historical. I think talking to kids is highly entertaining. If you ask them questions in a laid back way and let them run the show and not try to put words in their mouth. I think that's what's important. So, and I've had little kids give me spontaneous utterances that have been phenomenal, educational, and scary. But, and those can come in by virtue of the nature of how they disclose. But I think you want to be careful about this, and you should expect that you're going to have normal exams. So you want to make sure, again, I'm not going to go through how to do this because that's not the purpose of this meeting. The kid has to be seen by somebody who knows what they're doing, whether it's becoming with a head injury or with a fracture or a bruise or a burn. All right, so I'll give you an example of a burn case. It's a fascinating burn case. And the burn guys always, and I hate burns. I want to see every burn case because I think if you burn a kid intentionally, it has a certain sadistic element to it. I think parents can hit kids out of a sense of frustration, but I think to burn them, you got to plan it, and it's really scary to see a kid that's been burned. So I get called to the burn unit, and there's an 8-year-old little girl in the burn unit, and she is super smart little kid. She wants my stethoscope, and she wants to check everybody out in the room, and her mom's there. Totally appropriate. Has been reported to DCFS, has been detained in the burn unit before we got there. Because again, the guys in the burn unit, everybody's a victim of child abuse if they come in and they're burned, right? And she had this extremely interesting burn. She had in her genital area a triangular burn that looked like a steam iron had been put against her labia majora, externally or something like that. And you had the point up this way. And I thought to myself, wow, that would take a really being genius on how to inflict that on somebody. How did you do that? So I'm talking to her in the burn unit, and I asked her to tell me, how in the world did this happen? My God, you have this. I don't understand this. Explain this to me. And she explained it to me. The only way that could have ever happened was out of the mouth of that little kid. And what happened was they didn't have an ironing board. They were getting ready to go to some, party. And mom was ironing her dress. Okay, so she walks over on the floor. Let's just place the floor here. And she put the iron down facing the wall. So, okay, so the hot part's here. She's finished ironing her dress. You got the picture? So the iron's sitting like this. The kid has this glorious, fabulous curly hair that these kids have, right? And the mom goes to comb her hair, and the kid backs away from the mother because she doesn't want her to hit the tangles. She walks back, she hits the wall, and she sits down, and the iron goes in between her legs, all right? So in actuality, that was the only way that could have happened, but nobody asked the kid the right questions. Nobody's sort of sorted out. So all of a sudden, DCFS is gone. She's giving me my stethoscope back. I'm talking to the burn guys and saying, you guys really screwed this up. And he comes roaring out of his office and goes, like I never make mistakes. I'm a surgeon, right? And I said, no, this is exactly. And the only way it could happen. So she went home with her highly protective mom. The idea being is that it's just a sort of knee-jerk response to being abused. I'm not into that world. All right? So how are you doing it? Who's looking at them? And we do all the consults in the hospital. So bruises, look. You want somebody to say that's accidental? That's non-accidental, right? So the idea of multiple bruises, pattern bruises, obviously I'm not accidental. So I had this kid in my clinic on a Friday afternoon. Friday afternoon, I'm again in my clinic. I teach. I am a professor at SC, so I have med students, and I have this kind of Ichabod Crane-ish tall, skinny kid in the third year, totally scared out of his mind to be in my clinic, right? Because it's his first rotation. After the second year, I'm completely and totally scared. Plus, he's in my clinic, and I'm running the clinic. And we had 2 kids that had been abandoned on the beach of Santa Monica by their parents. And it was 105 degrees or something outside. And they had cigarette burns on them and stuff, and filthy, dirty, and hungry. And so we were cleaning them up, and I'm asking him to go find clothes for my little girl that was 6 or 7 years old, and he's looking at me like I'm out of my mind. Because in VIP, we have a huge closet with clothes. We have food. I had to put a shower in there because I was never going to do a rape case without a shower again. So I'm washing her hair, and we got them all swept away and sent them back to wait for social work to come get them new clothes, fed, cleaned up, feel really good about yourself. Meanwhile, there's an African American woman who actually spent her entire childhood at McLaren, and when her father came and got her out of McLaren, I took the social history from her. He then raped her. She's extremely intelligent. She's she was sent there by DCFS because she took in her boyfriend's 12-year-old boy from another relationship into her household because he showed up at her door with this boy and said, take him, I don't want him. She took him. And they're living in, and I'll tell you, when you take a social history, you figure out what the problem is. And he wasn't doing his work, and he wasn't going to school, and wasn't paying attention. She hit him. So there's a pattern bruise on his face, right? DCFS brings him in. They want to detain him. Where are they going to put a 5'10", 175-pound black kid in this county? Where's that kid going? It's going to go to a group home. Okay. It's going to take an act of God to get him out of the system, or one of you. And I'm sitting there looking at this woman who took this kid in, who wasn't her own kid. And I say to her, I said, why'd you hit him? She said, because he wouldn't do his work. I said, what can I do for you that will make it impossible for you to hit him again? And I said, where are you living? She's living in a studio apartment with her daughter, who's 11, with this kid who's not related to her. No furniture, sleeping on the floor. So I cut a deal. You went home with her, with our support, and furniture was delivered the next day. I talked to the guy who owns the apartment, upgraded them to a single-bedroom apartment, and cut them a deal. They had to come see me every week. Because that's the real answer to safety, security, and improved outcomes. It wasn't putting him in a group home. I mean, I have to get real. You know, like we were talking about, we have to find real solutions. So the idea being, yes, the kids come in with bruises. I don't think every kid needs to go to foster care because they got hit. I think if they're a little kid and they got hit, I probably want them. Here's the bruising of the year that actually was seen in Lance Holmes' case a couple of times, and nobody reported it. Strangulation remarks, skin findings that mimic. I had a mother one time, I should have this paintball fight, hot tub brain injuries, dangerous. Move around doing that. Kids with coagulopathies, a lot of kids. I've seen kids on Fridays that had diagnosed leukemia in my clinic because they had bruising. Medical findings. Phytophotodermatitis, kids that are allergic to citrus juice. They come in and they have these hand marks on them and other kinds of things that look like bruises. One mother knew what her kid had, and when DCFS tried to take the kid away years ago, she refused to leave, sitting on the door in front of my clinic when I was in a trailer, saying, I'm not leaving until Dr. Heger gets here. I don't want you to take my kid. And the idea being that you get these reported, and you, at 2 o'clock in the morning, you want somebody there to see them and make sure that that's okay. Mongolian spots, cupping, pointing, insect bites, contact dermatitis, pressure blisters, infection, accidental skull burns, contact burns. I talked about it. So there are a lot of things you can ask for. Well, the cop should be asking for them in cases like how hot was the water, pattern burns on the past. I hate this stuff. The idea of looking at, okay, so burns across the board. I would want somebody to look at the burn pictures and tell me whether it's accidental or not. It's easy to do. It's easy to do. I mean, I had a kid come in to see me whose father was stripping furniture, and the kid got his jacket and the strippies, so he had a burn around his wrist, and then that was irritating him, so he pulled the jacket up, and he had another burn around his arm, and he was reported. Are you sure you know what you're doing, Heger? This looks like a burn to me. I said, it is a burn. It's an accidental chemical burn. But you want to be able to differentiate that. Skeletal injuries, like kids have accidents. How many in this room have had kids their own kids break their arms or their legs, right? Of course, my kid broke his arm skiing. It wasn't abuse. Little kids jumping off of bunk beds or beds have fractures, and you want to look at them. The spiral fracture doesn't mean somebody twisted the kid's legs. It means the kid's not completely calcified. So, you have to have people that actually know what they're doing. So obviously, if they have lots of injuries, you want to know about them. What kills kids in the 2-year-old range is people punch them in the stomach or kick them in the stomach, and then they get severe internal injuries. And so we want them to be seen. They come in, they're sick, they have flu-like symptoms. We want to admit them and work them up. But at the same time, they can also have other diseases that can cause them to have the various systemic findings, and there has to be a differential. You have to know how to work them up. You have to know what the imaging looks like. So there's accidental findings. Through all of this head injuries. Okay, so I had 2 cases sent to me from Kaiser. Has a problem reporting sometimes. And the idea that kids were force-fed and they break the frenulum, which is what hooks your lip to your jaw, both upper and lower. And somebody looked at it and it was huge and unbelievable. And they called us and we asked them to bring the kid over to us. So now I have a relationship with Kaiser. They have to call me on their cases, and I'll consult with them over the phone. And if I think the kid needs to be seen, they have to send them to me because they don't have a child abuse program at Kaiser. So that should be a red flag to you.
Does Children's consult with you?
Just children, like the other USC hospital. No, but we see a lot of their kids. Okay. See a lot of their kids. Because children's cases are all seen in the ER. I don't know what to say about that. I'm an attorney.
We can figure that out.
I mean, you need to think about who's seen these kids. You get the report. And ask yourself that question. You can call me, shoot me an email. I'll talk to you about it. But it's hard on us because then everybody gets, it's like lawyers too. You don't like to be contradicted. So let's go through this real quick and we'll get to the end. Head trauma. Look not every case of head trauma is shaken baby syndrome, right? Kids who come in with shaken baby syndrome or with abusive head trauma or acceleration, deceleration are sick kids. All right? So you want somebody that has I'm not going to go through this. But if you have a case, you should come, we should talk about it. All right? They're sick kids. And they're not coming in with some, my kid had a subdural when I was a kid from an accidental injury. So you want to make sure that you're doing that. All right, let me just get through all this stuff. Retinal hemorrhages are highly significant. So we want to pay attention to that. Other forms of abuse, we talked about sex abuse. This is the other thing I want you to pay attention to. All right. You should ask for every kid that you see that you're representing that they're screened for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder. Hands down. 60% of the kids that are now failing placements in this county are born to alcoholic moms. Clearly, they are a time bomb waiting to go off. And they need to be assessed early and treated early in order for them not to become dangerous kids. So I became interested in fetal alcohol spectrum disorder when I opened my clinic 14 years ago, and all these kids coming in were funny-looking kids. I had friends who adopted kids out of the system, most of them very wealthy families on the west side, whose kids grew up to come home from school to try to kill their parents. And they all born alcoholic moms. They all have the same behavior patterns, and if you don't treat them early and get them into treatment and diagnosis, no kid that's in the system should be in the system unless they're screened for FASD, period, because they are so dangerous. When I read a national newspaper and they have, or LA Times, and they have the Nation, pieces in there, boy kills family in New Hampshire. I read the whole article to the bottom until they say adopted. It's not that I'm against adoption. I'm pro that if we put a kid in a family, that we do so with caution and with diagnosis, and assessment, and a plan, because they're dangerous. One of my friends adopted 2 FASD kids, and nobody ever diagnosed it, and one's in college and one's in lockdown school in Utah, and will be discharged at age 18. And I went up to see them, and I looked at the pictures of these 2 kids around their house, and they clearly have FASD. And their biggest thing when they wanted to talk to me was, when they come home, they're trying to kill us. So do you have a safe room you can go to? You need to make sure that your bedroom is a safe place to be. They're trying to kill them. And then this father, who's been a friend of mine for years, follows me out to the car. And I get in the car, he said, but Astrid, I really love Kevin. It's a nightmare in this county. Nightmare. A huge percentage of the kids going up for adoption are FASD. You're representing these people. They need to be assessed, because we can start treating them when they're little. We're trying to generalize that treatment across the board. So I'm not going to teach you how to diagnose it, but it's not that hard. And a lot of the kids that are in probation and incarcerated are FASD. I think that the FASD population dominates our prisons.
Dr. Heger, in
Yeah.
terms of representing parents, if there is no information, like in the report or history of the family, that the mother was an alcoholic, is there something else? Should we still be?
You should, because I think it should be required that every kid in every case that you're seeing gets assessed for FASD. The reason being, whether it's bio parents, adoptive parents, foster parents, whatever it is, if you're representing the kid should have access for intervention that will prevent them from ending up incarcerated. I mean, we haven't done it. I'm just telling you that we should have that chance.
Do you see very much lead poisoning in little
No.
ones? No.
No, some, but not a lot. So I see a tremendous number of kids who are born to alcoholic moms. Yeah.
I've always been curious about the lack of cross-cultural studies, specifically with AFSAD, especially with European countries where you have cultures who for centuries it has been a norm to drink wine with the meal, and you're not seeing the degree of violence or incarceration as we have in the United States. So I guess my question is, to what degree is it nature or nurture? What degree is it societal? What degree is it actually science-based? So what studies are you aware of that takes your premise and cross-cultural impact, let's say in Italy, France, England?
Okay, so let's look at that.
Or in
England,
European countries?
well, let's look at France. France and many of the countries happen to be European. That's where my roots are. They have institutionalized very aggressive interventions with young children, with free daycare for everybody, in-home services, home visitations, and I do a lot of cases in the UK. I see kids that are FASD. They all respond and get aggressive treatment. We have not done that here.
So do you mean when you have nationalized or socialized medicine?
Right.
That that's a better, and free childcare and social services, that's the difference?
It is. I'm obviously not going to make Trump's cabinet, am I? No. It makes a huge difference, and that's my point. If we diagnosed it early enough, or we knew what was going on, and we got involved in it, we created a different environment, we can teach these kids to develop executive function so they can make choices that aren't to kill their parents. So we aren't doing that. And when you look at FASD across the board, now you take a nation that is in the depths of FASD tragedy is Canada. because Canada sent all of their native population off to be sexually abused in the boarding schools of Canada. And they all came out basically drinking and trying to kill each other. And they have the biggest population of FASD problems anywhere in the world is in Canada. It's cold. I mean, I'm Norwegian. It's cold in Norway too. There's a lot of alcoholism in Norway, but they provide early interventions, diagnosis, and treatment for these kids, which we haven't done here because we're not interested.
Would you say the same thing for drug-exposed children if there was early intervention and treatment, or what is the corollary with the drug-exposed children?
I would take a drug-exposed kid any day of the week over an alcohol-exposed kid. Alcohol causes brain damage. Drug addiction causes withdrawal. Meth and alcohol together is pretty potent and pretty damaging to the brain, but it's the alcohol that causes there to be a structural breakdown in the brain, and so it's like missing half your brain. You have to retrain the brain. So by starting early enough and beginning to retrain it, and it's really a parent-child dyad treatment. I think we don't do a very good job in this country. We don't do good prevention. We don't link people with services. We're going to get worse. So I mean, we're trying our best, but so here's what we're going to do now. We're really looking at big money coming in from mental health and looking at ways to identify family needs. What's the single biggest factor we could change in the society that could try to change the idea of child abuse and child endangerment is if we decided that we were going to make sure that single poor mothers and poor families were never isolated, that we linked them with services, that we were aware of where they were, that we did in-home care, that we made sure they had food. We looked at housing and we started doing all of that nature. I mean, County General is looking at building a center to start intercepting homeless, mentally ill, and start with the youth. And of course, I'm advocating to start with the kids, little kids. But I will tell you right now, if you're anticipating adopting a child in LA, make sure that they are assessed for fetal alcohol spectrum disorder on your way to have the judges sign off on your adoption papers. Yes.
In regards to defending our clients, is there anything that could look like fetal alcohol syndrome but isn't fetal alcohol syndrome?
Well, I mean, you can have kids that are autistic that, could have some behavior changes, et cetera. So you really want them to be assessed. If you have the kids are developmentally delayed, have other things that should be, you really want to be looking at that. And that's one of the reasons why we think who you represent are kids in the system, right?
No.
Yeah, right? Parents. So they're hoping to get their kids back, right? Is that what you're saying? Okay. So what you really want to do is make sure that the kid has got an assessment, because it goes to a whole different way of looking at the child if you know that if they have developmental delays, et cetera, for other reasons, or whether they have been exposed to alcohol and drugs. And you know what? I can remember, I used to run groups at the IP, and I remember this woman who lost her kids because she had one child born drug addicted and exposed, and it came out with them. And I looked at her, and she was working really hard, and maybe one of you represented her to get her kids back. And the kids were coming, and she was coming, and she was working really hard. And I looked at her, and the kids were really struggling, struggle. I said, why don't you admit that you feel responsible for them having be abused by their dad who sexually abused these girls because you were using drugs? I mean, just own it. Take it on yourself. Be responsible for it. Get your kid well. And she looked at me, and I said, and it turned out she'd also been sexually abused as a kid. And I said, it's amazing what owning your own stuff it can do for your kid in terms of getting going. And the kids, as soon as she owned it, the kids started recovering. So part of it is getting kids back, yes, representing parents, yes, but also getting kids back that can be healthy and productive and the parents actually want it. So I don't envy you your job, but I think it's, you're representing the parents, you're also really representing getting a kid back that is better than after they've come home than before. And I'm worried about unhealthy situations in foster care, which is a whole nother topic. Yes.
If we receive medical reports or documents and we're concerned about whether or not the people reviewing the child judgment, kind of like some of the examples that you've given, do you ever review cases and then make a different assessment?
I do that all the time. I think we do that all the time. That's one of the things that you can ask for, is to say, I want this case reviewed by somebody who qualifies with some expertise. And I would want to know exactly what's going on. Come on. I mean, I early on in my career, I used to say you could find medical findings that are diagnostic of abuse if you didn't like the parents, if nobody's looking at it. If you're held accountable, then you're more likely to be neutral and a scientist.
And do you find that in cases where you do that, the court orders you to review it you personally, or we contact you?
Well, it depends. I think if the court orders it, we work for the county of LA, essentially. I mean, I work for SC, but county gives them the money to give to me after SC takes their portion. But if you ask the judge, say, I'd like to have this case reviewed. I mean, that would be, we get court orders all the time for them. I mean, have somebody say, we have a lot of doctors in this county that are experts. Say, I want somebody to look at this case and knows what they're doing. I don't believe this report. I mean, that's what I would do if I were a lawyer. I considered going to law school some years ago. And then I visit my son, went to the University of Chicago law school, and I went and sat in the back of the room for some of his classes, and I decided that was a territory that I would rather not invade. You have questions about how I would proceed if I were you in doing these cases? I would be a skeptic, and I would look at cases carefully and think about it. And if you need help with your cases, I think we want it to be fair and honest. We're not here to take kids away from parents. Quite the opposite. When I started, I would say 30% of my career was undoing a bad diagnosis. 30%. Yes.
When in utero, at what age do children usually get FAS?
First trimester.
It's the first trimester. So if a client didn't receive prenatal care, like many of our
Or they didn't know they were pregnant.
didn't know they were pregnant because they didn't receive prenatal care.
But nobody's looking at guilt. Nobody's pointing fingers at anybody and said you were drinking, you big bad person. We're looking at how do we take care of your kid so that actually the child can come home.
Drinking is required for kids.
Is this a personal question?
You hear about how doctors allow like a glass of wine?
I think doctors are crazy. I do. I would say no drinking at all if you think you want to be pregnant or.
So even like the tiniest amount, like a minimal.
I would no drinking.
He's gonna be
Hang on a
involved.
second.
So you're off the boat. Cancel the
Yeah,
class.
I'm actually not on campus. Maybe I'm. Okay, thanks.
To be debating it.
No, I will tell you, I did this, I had, trying to get funding for this, okay, at one point. Because nobody is sexy, alcohol's not sexy because it's legal, right? Cocaine is sexy, right? Alcohol is not sexy. So I was in this foundation and I said, I need money because I want to start this clinic, and there's no clinic in LA for FASD, right? And one of the board members from this foundation, very, upscale West LA lady, was there, and she waited till everybody left the room, and she came up to me and she said, my husband and I had a huge fight when I was pregnant with my middle child in the first trimester, and I went binge drinking for 3 days, and I have an FASD kid. There are degrees of it, okay? There are kids that are really, really desperate and end up in regional center, and then there are kids that are extremely intelligent, and if they're not treated, if they lose their executive function, they end up in San Quentin. Yeah.
So now that we know that there's this long-term developmental issues with alcohol, some of the literature that I'm now reading shows that we're not seeing the corollary with the crack babies. The children who 20, 30 years ago got detained, and we thought that there was this crack epidemic. And we're not seeing necessarily the same developmental issues that we thought were going to develop, and that they're telling us where it really is happening is with alcohol.
Yeah.
What is that?
Well, crack cocaine, we could all do that. We could all do that when we're, and we would just be happy, right? Alcohol. Alcohol, if you're pregnant, causes there to be a split in your brain between the right side and the left side. So there's no integration of what you know with your actions. And so that is permanent. And my brother, God rest his soul, was an orthopedic surgeon that adopted 8 kids. All right, so I'm talking to him and I say, how's everything going, Malcolm? He goes, too many kids, too much alcohol. And he had 6 out of 8 that were fetal alcohol spectrum disorder kids. And the worst one is the most famous child he has, is the youngest one, interesting kid. He had to have surgery to repair, had to have neurosurgery to repair because it was such a schism down his brain. So, brain damage is irreversible. Cocaine, you have to go through withdrawal. And withdrawal is exactly that. It's a reversible condition.
So when babies are born with methamphetamine, marijuana, or crack, or in their system, and many times we'll see where maybe the mother tests positive, but maybe the baby doesn't test positive. The Apgar score is very high. There is no indicia of withdrawal. The baby is feeding, fine. What is the risk then, even though all the judges have the knee-jerk reaction that any type of neonatal drug usage is bad, but what I'm asking for, because I'm not seeing it, is where are, again, the long-term studies that make that nexus or that link? Where is the risk?
Well, you should ask those judges then. I don't think, I would tell you right now, I'd be happy to come to court and say, I'm not worried about the cocaine baby, what the long-term impact is. Yes, a withdrawal. Yes, they're jittery. Yes, they can be jittery for months. But the long-term impact of many of those drugs is nil on who that kid becomes. Alcohol is what causes there to be brain damage. And that's the dangerous thing.
What about prescription drugs and the opioid epidemic?
That still doesn't cause brain damage. Alcohol causes brain damage. Interesting, isn't it? We make no big deal about alcohol a good deal of the time. Why, man, it scares the living bejesus out of me. You talk to, I mean, literally, these West Siders that adopted all these kids, maybe some of you live on the West Side.
And adopted kids.
And they spent, they gave $25,000. My brother was extremely wealthy. He spent $30,000, $50,000 to adopt every one of those kids. And some of these kids are coming back trying to kill those people. They said that changed their life forever, and they'll never recover. So, I mean, I'm just saying is that when I was talking to the Eisner family, and I was getting money out of them for my elder abuse project, they had the son at the end of the table, and I was trying not to alienate anybody because I really actually wanted his money. And they said, we want to talk to, what do you think about adopting? And I'm like, oh, that's a conversation that we should have after the board meeting. Because I didn't want to say I wouldn't adopt. I would adopt, but I want my kid assessed. Yeah.
So since we represent parents, if we have a parent who may have had fetal alcohol syndrome when they were younger, and of course it goes untreated,
Right.
Is it impossible for them to rehabilitate certain behaviors? Say they constantly get into domestic violence and they have those kind of issues.
You know, that's a very good question. And I think what you want to do, and one of the things we're talking about with the attorneys that represent incarcerated youth and adults, is that we want to get an idea if they have FASD, because we really want to hook them up with the right kind of intervention that will prevent them from being in this chronic cycle. And if you have parents like that, talk to me. You know, my email is easy. It's Heger@usc.edu. And for those of you who went to UCLA, you'll have to pass that hurdle. It is, that's my email. So it's Heger@usc.edu. Ask me. Because right now I'm working with probation on adults that are coming out as well, and looking at ways that we could work with them to become healthier parents. You know, parenting classes, following them, helping them, figuring out what they need. Because I think I'm really pro-family. I'm pro-child, but I'm pro-family. I hope you do that. Yeah.
Do you see a lot of misdiagnosed ADHD kids that are actually at institution?
What is that? What is ADHD? Tell me what that is.
I don't even know.
Can you explain it?
Like my friend who, like the teacher swore he had ADHD. I just know all these different professionals. No. Finally, he sits down with his family, his general family practice physician and says, yeah, that ADHD because he keeps swinging his leg. He can't sit still. So I think there are tons of misdiagnosed ADHD kids, but I'm wondering if some of that is this fetal alcohol syndrome. I mean, I didn't drink when I
was. So I'm not a big believer in the use of that diagnosis and the treatment of children with medications that are frightening to me, that we put kids on all these medications. I would like to see kids actually appropriately assessed. If you look at this, if you look at the USA and talking about FAS kids, if you're in Boston, they have one thing, and if you're in New Haven, they have something else. And if they're in state of Washington, they have FASD. If they're in Canada, they have FASD. If they're in Chicago, they have FASD. And right now in LA, if they're here, we're hoping that somebody considers that diagnosis. Mm-hmm. It's the idea that it's like, there's so much misdiagnosis in this. I mean, this couple that the kids are trying to kill them, they've been on every single solitary intervention for ADHD. That's why I'm asking you, what is that? Do you know how to diagnose that? I don't. I mean, it's a catch-all. And that question needs to be asked. And what more? If you're representing the parents and you want to get their kid back, don't you want them to be successful? Right. So you want to figure out what the heck's going on with the kids, because they're going to come back and not be successful in that family if somebody's not looking at them. And also looking at parents. What does this family need to be successful? Which is what we're trying to build in the county right now, which is, I think, the reason why I'm hopeful. I think there's enough people in the county right now are interested in that. And so I'm hoping that my voice will be heard loud and clear about what I think should happen to families. Yeah.
Sorry, another question. Is there a cutoff age to when FASD can be accurately assessed?
I can't, not really, no. I think we'll use testing and other modalities, so we're looking at executive function on the older kids.
So essentially use it only when the child as a kid, or?
No, we look at them all the way through, we see adults as well. So we're, a lot of defense attorneys for incarcerated individuals are interested in that. There was a special done on, I have this guy, I don't know this guy from SC came, talked to me about a documentary he's making for HBO on this kid in Tennessee who had been abused as a child growing up and ended up killing, and it's been all over the media recently. And she ended up killing a John that she thought was reaching for a gun to kill her. So she was packing, so she killed him instead. And she got charged as an adult and is in life in prison at age 13. And if you look at it, so they brought me this case and they said, we want to discuss about the impact of child abuse on her ability to make good decisions, right? And I took one look at her and I went, oh, she got FASD. Go back and take a history. So you look at this at the special, and you see them go back and take a history from the mom and the grandma, and they're sitting on the front porch of this shack somewhere in probably Alabama. So I like Alabama more right now. And they're talking about that she's drinking a fifth of whiskey every day when she was pregnant with this kid. But the guy that was doing the special was not pleased with me because he didn't want it to be another etiology. He wanted it to be child abuse. Alcohol is a terrible thing. The kids are going to go home to their parents, and they're not going to be successful at home. So it would be better to say, I want every kid and every family I represent to get evaluated.
In terms of, representing the parent, if maybe they're not successful in their case plan, is there something we should be looking for, some behavior that they are exhibiting so that maybe we can have someone assess them? Maybe that's why they can't be successful.
I think take a history from them about their own family history, about what their parents were like. So you get a tradition of this adverse childhood experiences, including alcoholic parents that they were born to, and say, wow, man, I tell you, a lot of people who were born into that situation have a hard time with executive function. You know what I mean with executive function? It's like when you go up to a corner and the light is red, right? You know not to cross the street right there. And if you don't, and you can't integrate that perception with the action, you could cross and get run down. That's executive function. I'm going to go back to USC right now because we're working on building a system there about how to retrain people to be more empathetic. It'd be a good experiment. We could compare lawyers to doctors. We are looking at ways to train people to be more empathetic to their patients and the people they take care of. Like, how do we listen? And all that good stuff.
All right, well, thanks.
Yeah. So I don't want to be in an adversarial position with any of you, but I think what you have to understand is my bent in my brain is that every kid deserves to be in a nuclear family where they're loved and cared for. And your job is not only to represent the parents to get the kids back, but to give the parents the skills to be that person. So that it's a dual thing that you do. And we should be helping each other do that. I'm really into these parents. And one of the cases, I'll tell you this, that one of the big cases I did in Texas for the Innocence Project, I looked at this case. They put 4 gay women in prison for 17 years down there based on a bad diagnosis. And the Innocence Project called me and asked me to review the case. And it was done by one of my buddies in this country that does child sex abuse cases. But since I was the first one to ever do these cases, right? And I wrote the textbook on it, so I kind of knew what the state of knowledge should have been and what she should have done. So I called her on it. And she says, wow, if I go and say I've changed my mind, I'm going to be headlines in the newspaper in San Antonio. And I said, well, If I come to San Antonio and do a news conference, you're gonna be headlines in the newspaper anyway. So why not you take on a heroic, stand? So 2 years ago, we got these women out of prison, exonerated, declared innocent 2 days before Thanksgiving. And it was just, and it was, you could just see the prejudice that was in place. So, I'm an advocate, right? But I'm an advocate for what's right, not for law enforcement or prosecution or whatever else goes along with that. And I'm gonna go try to be a doctor for a couple hours. Did I drop a key?
Yeah, I think so.
Okay.